We are live. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this second edition of Mindmine Mondays, the digital version of Mindmine Next. We received a very encouraging response to the first edition last week, featuring Mr. Mohandas Pai and Mr. Sanjeev Vikchandani. And going by that response, we present the next edition titled the OYO story this time, featuring its CEO and founder, Ritesh Agarwal. And for leading this discussion today, we have none other than our chairman, Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal. Sir, before I hand over the proceedings to Mr. Munjal, I would like to remind all the participants that this is being streamed live on Zoom and also on social media, Facebook as well. Once the webinar gets over, you will receive a feedback link. Please do give your valuable feedback after the webinar gets over. Over to you, sir. Please take over the proceeding.
All right, thank you. Good evening, all. It's a pleasure to be back with you folks after a week. And as we had said, the Mindmine Next will create this platform of ideas exchange that we are now calling Mindmine Mondays. So every Monday, 5 p.m., please feel free to join us. We will have an interesting session each time. And this time we have genuinely an absolute unique session with a very unique individual. The speed at which the events are unfolding before us around the world reminds me of a famous quote once by Lenin, who said there are decades that nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. And that's what's going on right now. Cataclysmic changes have shaken up the world before, whether it was a world war, whether it was a Great Depression, or it was a Spanish flu. But this current generation has not seen anything like this in its living memory. It's all that we read from history books. So we are in some sense living history right now. It's also said that every crisis brings out the best and the worst in people. And we are actually seeing that. We are seeing people reaching out to those who are homeless, supporting them, cheering on the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, the ward boys, and also those who make our life easier, the vegetable grocer, somebody who's delivering a mail package in our home. They are all putting their lives at risk to allow us to live a comfortable life, a safe, comfortable life in our homes. The entire world is seeing a time when every citizen in every town, every city, in every country is impacted, either locked in at home or forced to work in a specific place in a specific manner. So it is in many ways a unique time. We are walking a tightrope right now. One between managing to keep the infection at bay through curfews and lockdowns, and the other where the economic pandemic is now the looming fear in people's mind that if we remain locked out for too long, that the impact on the economy would be debilitating, and coming out of this would take a very long time. Even now, there is a belief that the amount of economic activity and value add that we have lost in the last some weeks, and that we are likely to lose in the coming weeks, while these lockdowns continue in different forms and different versions around the world, that it will take us anywhere from 18 to even 24 months to recover to what was normal a few months ago. In this period, it is useful for us to get ideas from people who have seen dramatic growth and dramatic upheavals in their businesses. To have this conversation with us, we have a very unique individual. Somebody who started coding when he was 8 years old. At 19, he started a business. While he's India's youngest billionaire, he's still only 26 years old. So sometimes one starts to wonder, what is going on here? What is special about this unique individual? The business he built only a year ago was being rated as the fastest growing company in the history of mankind. I'm proud to be able to present to you and to have a conversation with Ritesh Agarwal, the founder, chairman, and CEO of OYO. OYO is in itself a unique story, which I believe is on your own. That's why it's OYO. And that's how I believe he started off just by himself, borrowing stuff from his brother and just going out and doing things by himself, including selling SIM cards and then carrying on to find something more innovative and difficult to do. So Ritesh, welcome to this conversation, which we call the Mindmine Mondays. This is the digital version of the Mindmine Summit that we have taken to the next level through the Mindmine Next series. So I'd like to welcome you and thank you for making the time to be with us and to be available to answer questions that I will ask initially. And we will also invite questions from the audience that we will take towards the end of the conversation. First, tell me, how are you spending your time nowadays? What do you do with yourself? Since you are like any of us, you're also locked in home.
Thank you, first off, Mr. Munjal, for having me on this discussion. As you know, these are unprecedented times. And like you said, we are all living history. I have had a great penchant to read about history and read about the previous world wars and times like those. And I always thought how unique people living in those times would have felt. And honestly, at those times, it would feel to begin with that it is just normal, or it's a tiny change, but the after effects are visible for decades, if not centuries. So I think you're absolutely right. We're living history. I think for me personally, I'm doing what most other people are doing, that is being on video calls, making sure that you can engage with as many people around you at work as possible. My parents are in Odisha, so occasionally call on to them to check if they are okay. But that's about it. I think staying indoors is the only way to stay safe and to make sure others are safe.
You know, you came from a small town in Orissa. My question is, do you think people who come from small towns to the big cities are hungrier, are willing to put themselves out more than others? And is that the drive that you had when you came to the city?
Sure. I think coming from a place, so I came from South Odisha in a town called Raigada, which is in the Odisha-Andhra Pradesh border. I think, people who come from the smaller towns, first off, are of course hungry. They genuinely want to make a difference. But there is another unique attribute that's not talked a lot, which is the sense of values that are instilled in people, especially when you're growing up in a small town. Being in a small town with middle-class parents and a town which almost everybody knows each other, I think the sense of values that get instilled are very critical and very valuable as you think about life long after. And I think third, which is most critical in my view in today's world, one generation back, I think this differentiation was very, very visible. That is, are you from a small town or a city? I think because of technology in the current generation, the gaps have significantly reduced. And there's a more level playing field than ever before, that no matter where you're from, if you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to make a difference, then you may get appreciated. You may not get it as quickly as others, but eventually there is light at the end of the tunnel.
So I believe you started selling SIM cards for Bharti Airtel when you were 13 years old. And then something happened about a TV not functioning or a remote not functioning. What is it that drove you to start this new business?
So, right since the early days, I've always wanted to try and do different things. So I was 13 years old. The telecom revolution was gripping the country. Every town or city, across the country was getting painted red or orange or blue, depending on which was a telecom network. More red and orange than blue, but all three in that respect. So I found that quite intriguing. So that's how I got involved with Airtel, helping them distribute SIM cards and recharge vouchers back in the day. Very few people would know that OYO's red color And its initial pricing at $9.99 comes from Airtel, because in Airtel we used to have the lifetime prepaid, which was $9.99, quite popular in those times. So right from the early days, I wanted to try and do new things. I think one thing led to another. And at one point of time, I realized that people are just not independent. If you grew up in a small town, you'd know that the only holiday vacations, especially in India, are primarily the pilgrim vacations, which you have to go to the temples, and invariably you're staying with your relatives. So the ability for people to become independent, where they don't need to ask their chacha ji's bhai to say that, do you know somebody who is in Banaras or is in Vijayanagaram where we could stay with? I think that fundamentally made a lot of sense to me. That is, people can be independent with a clean, comfortable place, which is quality assured, but in price point something which is not $100. It's a price point that a common middle class consumer can afford. So that's what inspired me to set up OYO hotels. Early days, the aspiration was to set up just a few hotels, but started with one. And of course, when you start your first hotel, you never know the opportunity size worldwide over a period of time.
So I believe when you started the hotel in Gurgaon, which is now Gurugram, you were the CEO, you were the catering manager, you were the housekeeping manager. Tell us, did that experience help you as the business grew to become a global scale, global size business? Does it now help you to understand people's issues better in your own organization?
Sure. Look, I think, in comparison to my management, as you know, sir, over the last few years, I've had the good opportunity to bring in some of the most sophisticated management across various ecosystems in our management team. And I think invariably, my job of value accretion is broadly two or three things. The first one is the ability to bring the real life, authentic learnings from the ground of our industry, which comes in right from those days till now. Even today, I would be on a WhatsApp one-on-one with hundreds of our property owners, hundreds of our customers. We chat with a lot of our Chinese hotel owners. So being able to make sure that you are connected to the ground and have authentic perspective of saying that what would that extra piece of toiletry cost the asset owner? What would the lifestyle of that asset owner be? What would be in the consumer's mind when they're making a decision? Each one of those plays a critical role in being able to bring first principle thought process into our leadership. And I think the second, which is what not to do, because in the early days at small scale and even today, you can constantly learn a lot of things that have been tried a lot of times. For example, in our industry, for way too long in India, people tried to do what was called limited service. Everybody thought before OYO that for the budget segment to be successful, we got to do limited service. But हमारे देश में people care about साफ सुथरा कमरा, but more than that, they care about रात को घर जैसा खाना मिल जाए होटल में. The khana attribute is so critical that consumers will decide whether they need to go to a hotel or not, depending on that. Which is why you'd find it amazing that a large number of OYO hotels in India actually serve food at a beck and call for $15, $20 price point a night. So I think from that perspective, we've got those learnings of being the housekeeping person, front office person, reservations person, marketing person has been very critical, and something that allows me to earn respect of my fellow OYO colleagues, because they don't feel that Ritesh is just the CEO. They feel like I could do and have done and still enjoy doing some parts of the jobs that each one of us as OYOpreneurs do.
So I'm going to take you back to a personal question again, since you talked about Ghar Ka Khana. Now, you may be a big business leader right now, but for your parents, you're still their kid. You're getting to an age where parents start to push you. Do you hear from your parents? When are you planning to get married? Are you not planning to get married? What's wrong with you? Why are you taking so long?
So a lot of this was broadly avoided until my elder brother got married. But, some time back, my elder brother got married. So that's been a pressure that's gotten started, but I try to convince them that at least for the near future, I am married to OYO, which is a big enough responsibility for now. So I'm dealing with it. But I get to speak to my parents every week, 2 weeks. They're as anxious as always. And for them, still the biggest challenge, like for every parent, is how are you dealing with all the challenges in front of you? They don't fully understand what jobs we all have, but they're just happy that I don't ask them more than love and happiness, even though they still try to convince me that I should take pocket money from them.
Yeah, wonderful. So I believe you met Peter Thiel a few times, the co-founder of PayPal, and you've also spoken of Bill Gates and Bhavish of Ola as some of your inspirations. Can you just mention very quickly, briefly about each one of them? What did you find special about each one of these three?
So Peter Thiel, I got to know about Peter Thiel watching this movie called The Social Network, where he became the first investor in Facebook. And I asked myself, how amazing would it be if I ever get the opportunity to learn something from him? And then I applied for the Thiel Fellowship. I was lucky that I became one of the earliest Asian residents to become a Thiel Fellow. In a lighter note, I got paid $100,000 to not go to university. The acceptance rates are lower than Ivy Leagues, but the condition is you have to stop out of university. I felt that was great. You get paid not to go to university. Peter Thiel is a fantastic individual. Anybody of you who would like should read one of his books called 0 to 1. I think a very well written first principle based book, which has become quite popular. What inspired me about him is his clarity of thought. And second, he's almost had a Midas touch, where not only the companies he built, but the people he brought together. He recruited roughly 12 people, and of those 12, 11 have gone to create billion-dollar plus companies over a period of time. So that's once in a lifetime kind of an example of decision of choice. He's also invested in a few companies, and almost every company has turned out to become life-changing in its own right. So that's what inspired me about him. I think Bill Gates has inspired me because people who have seen him a couple of decades ago, saw him as a fantastic business operator, as an innovator, and so on. But people who were born in the 90s, like me and many others, have only consciously seen Bill Gates beyond the founder of Microsoft as a philanthropist, as somebody who wants to do right for the world. There are lots of great business and technology geniuses who will be very successful in their own right. But the ones who are able to contribute to the society will, like the place I come from in Odisha, I think, the ability to eradicate diseases make people like him irreplaceable in the minds of common people for generations altogether. So that's what inspired me about him. The two, I think there are lots of examples of business people that I'm inspired by here in India. But if I were to talk about Bhavish, who I have talked about a few times, I think the two things that inspired me about him. The first one is he did not give up. He initially, very few people know, he actually started a travel agency. That didn't work. Then he tried something else, and one thing led to another before he started Ola. I think that sense of fighting, that not giving up. And second, the same thing replicated when he has had to compete with Uber, which is a large global company in the backyard here. And now he's taking the fight to, of course, lots of other global markets. So I think, there is a lot to learn there to see a first generation entrepreneur having done that. I started my business when Ola was really scaling up dramatically. So I in some way, saw through a lot of that expansion as you're doing. I remember starting the first OYO hotel and then saying, well, Ola is now a scaled up business that we can partner with OYO's first hotel that we are just starting now. So there's so much to learn. And I'm so lucky to be building a business when such greats of business industry are around us.
So you have been called by people by different names and adjectives. People have said you're ambitious, you're smart, you're clever, you're too clever, you're charismatic, you're a tough driver. What two adjectives do you think best describe you?
I think from my perspective, first off, I'm thankful for the love that we have gotten over the years. I think a lot of times when there is occasionally one or two tough articles about us, some people tell me that, Ritesh, how do you feel? I say, look, we've gotten thousands of positive love over the years. How many times can you imagine a young entrepreneur in their first generation building a business gets the appreciation that they do in today's generation than ever earlier? So I'm truly thankful for it. I think among all the adjectives, it's a hard question, sir, but I will attempt. The first one I would say is clarity. A lot of OYOpreneurs I work with call me Chief Clarity Officer. That is, I try to break down the problem into very simple ability for everybody to understand that ensures that, we are all driving in the same direction. And I would say the second one would be simple, which is, a lot of times I try to make sure that, because I did not go to some of the best business schools, the only way I know doing things is very first principle and simple. So I think those are two I would say, but both of those people would notice if they have seen me for a long period of time.
So the OYO Hotel brand and the many different subsets of the OYO Hotel group are now present across the globe in many, many countries. And you have generated a lot of press and media, both good and not so good. Let me talk about the negative ones first. People have blamed you, when I'm saying you, I mean your company and business, either for muscling out the small guy, the little hotels, sometimes not being fair with your hotel owners. Sometimes the other hotel associations have got together and complained about your organization. You had some controversial cases also in a couple of other countries. So what is the reality? What is one to believe when you hear all of this information and news in the media?
Sure. I think, this is a very important question and something that we talk a lot about internally as well. I think to begin with, what is critical to know is in the last 5 to 6 years, a lot of you have lived in your towns and have seen the neighborhood hotel for a very, very long time. What's amazing is most of these hotels basically got the demand only during the shadis or one or two unique occasions like that. And hence, most of them were at best surviving through these unique occasions of business or were finding it hard to survive itself. When OYO came to the market, we proposed a fairly simple deal. We said that this street has 2 big successful hotels and 18 small hotels. These 18 have very low occupancy, relatively not so good quality. We will work with you and we will democratize demand. We will make sure that consumers will see you 18 in equal levels with that top 2. That in some way transformed the hospitality industry grounds up.
Globally, let me interrupt here for a moment. Ritesh, you had told me once that the occupancy of the hotels, once they get an OYO badge and an OYO redress up, goes up from something like 26% to 75% in a short time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct for India and at least 7-8 other countries. That is, the average occupancy of a OYO hotel pre-OYO is around 26 to 30%. And this 26 to 30% is also the average, because the way it has always worked is in a street, if there are 18 or 20 hotels, invariably the 2 or 3 have friendship with one big corporate. And that's how they get all the business. And the 18 don't have the ability to reach out to that corporate And this is all pre-OYO in terms of lifetime. So these 18 are just struggling through. So invariably, these are property owners who had the savings to buy the second real estate asset, which is this guest house or a hotel. And they're hoping to just make enough money to make return on their investment. So this combined 40,000 plus hotel owners and 50,000 plus homeowners across the world come together and be partners with us. Now remember, these are all parts of the less than 18 group. Now let me begin. As a company, we always say that we always believe in acknowledgement and then talking about clarification / future aspiration. In terms of acknowledgement, what's critical for us to acknowledge is that out of these 18 hotels, if there were 3 or 4 of them as OYOs, while we were able to funnel demand into them and they were able to get the business jump that they needed, as we grew our business, we should have made sure that all the systems and procedures required for enabling our partners to have the best visibility of their economics, their business value accretion, the monthly accounts of balance, and so on, especially because they are not so well sophisticated, is very, very critical, which are simple statements, things which are very easy to understand. That is why a lot of the feedback came about from our own ecosystem. I will not deny the fact that our own asset partners also had potential areas of improvement from us. But it's also critical to remember that a lot of them give feedback to us while remaining in the network. The percentage of assets leaving the system are low, but the people who are in the system are, have pushback on us to say, guys, we are happy with the business, but you got to make improvements on 4 or 5 other things. But majority of the other noise that comes from the 14 other hotels in the street as well, who are not happy that these 4 get more business. Our proposal to those 14 is that we don't differentiate between asset partners. We welcome you to join us as well. And if not us, any other hotel ecosystem, or be independent. But because you are unable to deliver the best quality of customer service, we will not resort to setting up a fixed price in the neighborhood. We don't believe in that kind of business system. We believe our consumers should get best quality products at the lowest prices. And in order to do that, if there is a little bit of pain, we will take it. So I think that's the summary. That is, there is a fundamental value proposition we have created over a period of time. We believe there are improvements that need to be done. We are not a perfect company. We are constantly learning and improving. But at the same time, the value that we have added to these partners and continue to add in good and tough times is unique and probably disproportionate.
So as you built this business out, Ritesh, you and I have been talking about this over this period of time. There are 2 pieces of advice that I had given you, one to do and one not to do. So I had said, don't diversify into too many categories. You went and did 9 different subcategories of this business. And then you went and acquired some ready businesses as well. The second thing I had said is you should tie up with Masayoshi-san, for those who don't know, as a principal investor and advisor in the company. You followed one, you did not follow the other one. What do you think was the outcome of both, the extreme diversification and working with Masa?
Sure. Look, I think, let me give some background about where our company is today, because, just for the perspective of context. So OYO operates across the world in Asia Pacific, with its key markets in India, China, Southeast Asia, Japan. It operates in Europe primarily through its vacation homes business. It operates in North America and Latin America through its hotels business. One of the decisions that we made in early part of this year of 2020 was to primarily focus on our hotels and vacation homes business as the 2 critical businesses that we would work on across the world. But even these 2 businesses, with the geographies we operate in, is a very broad range of subset of businesses that we manage across the world. We were discussing in our review last time, sir, that just in Europe, we would have one business which is Scandinavian, which is in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, which is seeing a business jump as Denmark is opening out of the school and various other lockdowns. Whereas there is another business that is Benelux, which is Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, and various other markets, which is still impacted because of the coronavirus. But there is a third one, which is a subscription business called Churn, which is actually still going to generate an EBITDA of 11 million euros this year. So I think that combination of various businesses across the world, from our perspective, as I thought about it, we took a very simple perspective. We said, on one direction, globally, what are the one or two segments we can lead and become market leader in? Our perspective was being in big markets where there are big problem of short-term or mid-term stays in hotels and vacation homes is a big consumer need. Something that's not being addressed by any large brand. Second, we had the best sauce or secret sauce to be able to execute it in terms of our competencies of supply acquisition, renovation, operations, technology, demand generation, and so on. And third is we had a set of management available who can help us execute across these markets. That helped us execute this business worldwide. That's sort of the context behind expansion across the globe that we did last year. I think the second, which is partnership with SoftBank Vision Fund, I think we are very, in retrospect, we're very happy to have them as partners because we got significant amount of learnings from them in terms of as we made this aspirational move from being a little known hotel company here in India to becoming a global hospitality brand that you could find in the 100th city of Mexico to the most urban city in Europe.
So, your business is based on travel and movement of people. The world has now come to a stop. So tell us how that's impacting the business for the moment, and what are you doing in preparation of the return to near normalcy and then to normalcy as it happens across the globe?
Sure, this is the most important and probably the most contextual question of today. I believe what we are dealing with today is an unprecedented situation, something that has not been seen in decades, if not centuries. The hotel and travel industry, I can't think of any other industry that is as impacted as we are, because consumers will have this certain sense of fear in their heart as they decide to travel, not just now, but for a very long period of time. Families will try to suggest their friends or family to consider not traveling as much, especially not being in airplanes or similar kind of travel system. So this is an unprecedented problem, something that is not seen of earlier. Let me talk about the impact at various levels. Let me start with employees. OYO has employees across the world, and let's talk about the health impact of it first. The health impact of this crisis on OYO employees has meant that even though we have a large number of our OYOpreneurs in United States, Europe, and others, less than 10 OYO employees across the world have been tested positive, and we are in touch with each one of them. I'm glad to share that at least half of them have recovered, and not only those half have recovered, their families have also recovered who had contacted the virus. So that's one context. Talking about the business itself, the revenues are down from January. I consider January as the pre-COVID sort of benchmark. The revenues are down from January by roughly 50% or so, which if I compare to some of our peers in the hospitality industry globally, they are at 75, 80% in terms of drops because of various reasons that I will explain in a little while. This is where I think the diversification, as you were telling Sunilji earlier, is quite valuable. Because if we had business just in India, I think at this point of time in India, the only business is either stranded tourists, or in specifically there are some hotels which we have converted into quarantine shelters or shelters for the frontliners in our country, and we are our OYOpreneurs on the ground feel no less than heroes, serving all of them on a daily basis. But at the same time, having business exposure in Scandinavia, which is one of the, especially Denmark, which is recovering very quickly from the crisis, having business exposure in China, where the recovery has been coming up slowly, but surely. The subscription business, I think a few of these give us a path of visibility as to how and when the recovery may happen, how do you react to it? I think when our company is always designed for growth, where we were investing for saying that the company is continuing to grow so aggressively, so let's invest, in that growth. But we have never seen a decline of, forget this magnitude. We've never required to deal with a decline in revenue. So it's a completely new problem. But from our perspective as a management, we reviewed all the details as soon as we saw some of these challenges come up in China, and then we saw some of the ripple effects starting to come in Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific, where a lot of initial cases started becoming visible, and we started to see the economic impact of it. The immediate response was cutting all non-essential travel, some kind of G&A expenses, forward-looking capital investments, and so on, which were all controllable expenditures. Over the period of time, I think 3 weeks back, I announced on a video that is, the biggest cost structure in a company like ours is actually the people expenditure. It was very challenging because we were coming out of a big restructuring in January that we had announced. So it was quite painful to be able to look at that line item. So we continued saying that we should solve for everything else versus the people cost. But at some point of time, we realized that the issue of this crisis will be very long-term, especially when I saw Marriott CEO, Hilton, Choice, and every other large hotel company chairman or CEO announcing that they are furloughing or laying off almost large parts of their entire corporate or field workforce. We reviewed in detail, and one of the things that we decided was in these tough times, there will be no job cuts. It was very critical for us because while the economic constraints were there, we also have a view of saying that we need to balance that with a perspective of doing right by our team members. So we made sure that the first principle was whatever is required to ensure no job cuts, that will need to be thought of. Beyond that, I think what we decided was to follow through with some of the furloughs. We announced it publicly, and we have ensured that wherever the furloughs are happening, 100% healthcare benefits, Medicare benefits, school children, education, some cash for making sure people have the sustenance, each one of those are made available so that in these tough times, not a single person who's associated with our brand, we leave them on the wayside. We support them through this period. So that's sort of some initial perspective of how we are thinking about the impact of this crisis.
Thank you. I have actually a long list of questions I would have liked to ask you. I think we should keep a slightly longer time for this kind of an interaction. But because we also want the audience to participate, I'm going to stop here. And if there is time, maybe I'll take up a little bit about what is it that worries you about the future of the business? Where do you see competition coming? Is it an 18-year-old kid sitting on a laptop? Or is it any of the big hotel chains? Because you are now the third largest hotel chain, gearing up to become the second largest hotel chain in the world shortly. So we will let the audience in to ask some of the questions.
Thank you very much for this enriching discussion, sir. We have been receiving many questions from each one of you. Incidentally, we have over 600 people live watching this session. Also, it is beaming live on social media as well, in addition to the 600 people. So while we can't take questions from all of you, we'll take some select questions from some of you. The first question is from Mr. Anand Shriram from DCM Shriram. Over to you, Mr. Anand Shriram. Please ask your question.
Hi, Sunil.
Yes, you're live. Please ask your question.
We can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Ritesh, hi, really great what you've achieved. Obviously, this is a very difficult time for you and the hospitality industry. So we just wanted to ask you, how do you keep your team's morale high at a time like this?
Very, very good question, Anand. I think these are very unique and tough times. And I think there are 3 to 4 things that we are trying to make sure that we can keep our team members' morale high. First off, it's hard, not just because this is a tough time for our industry. It's also tough because we are all not together. We're trying to, we're trying to engage as much as we can through video calls and various systems in that process. So the 3 or 4 things we've done is, number one, being as transparent as we can be. I think it's very critical to make sure that, especially in this generation, people like to consider themselves as partners more than just employees. So I think being transparent with them right from, we've had discussions with our teams to say, if there is no revenue and if we make the decisions that we need to, we would have 3 years of capital. And in order to get there, here are the 10 things that need to be done. We've talked about what are the 5 cost structures that we're worried about and 5 revenue structures that will hamper the most, and various details of that order. The second is to make sure that we work together for a purpose. One of the purpose that we've decided is to support frontliners across the world in these tough times. Something that has been acknowledged by Vice President Pence and Ivanka Trump and the White House in the US, in India, in Southeast Asia, Japan, various other parts, that we are supporting frontliners for their accommodations when they're stranded, without having them worry about the social ills of people troubling them from coming back from hospitals or various other places to serve. So it gives them a sense of purpose that we are all working for something out here, which is trying to make a positive difference. The third is to make sure that there is a sense of authenticity and honesty, which is at all points of times, if there are bad things, tell them with as much enthusiasm as you'd say good things. And the fourth is equal sacrifice. Because team members are making a sacrifice, it's critical that I and my leadership team also take significant pay cuts in this period of time. So they see a sense of authentic perspective of saying that we are all in it together. The boat is all of us, but all of us will sail through this tough storms together rather than just a few of us.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
I hope you got your answer, Mr. Shriram.
Yeah.
The next question comes from Professor Amit Nandkuliar from IIM Ahmedabad. Professor Amit, over to you.
You need to unmute your mic,
Amit?
Professor.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry about that. It was a very interesting, discussion. Wish you all the best here. My big thing is now that we have gone through this crisis, what are 1 or 2 big learnings, from this situation? How do you get around it? Thank you.
Sure, Amit. I think that's a very important question, and honestly, we are all dealing with it in real time. So I'm sure there will be so many more learnings in the years to come. But here is my learning. Especially one example of our learning comes from China, because China and Denmark are 2 countries where we've seen the crisis hit to the peak and then get better, and you can see the impact of it. Or the positive direction from it. So here is how we've dealt with it. The first one is, first and foremost, is take care of people, because employees are the ones who get the most scared in this period of time. So be prepared to make sure that you support them in as many ways as possible. We set up not only direct employees, but also the indirect employees. There is a staff at the front line at the hotels. So we set up an OYO fund for all of them immediately in China. And over time, we've expanded that worldwide for our own team members as well as the hotel staff. The second is to make sure that you support your communities, which is what we're trying to do with the frontliners and various things in that order. The third is to make sure that you support your partners' ecosystem. Within that, I think in China, for instance, we had some challenges in the previous months before that, but in February, we actually paid roughly thousands of hotels their entire sustenance cost free of cost. So we paid every hotel owner a few $1,000s just as a gift. There was no revenue, but we said we still want to give it to you so that you can sustain and see through this process. We are trying to do the same in India, wherein, of course, there is some news of us triggering force majeure, which is true for less than 5% hotels due to a specific implication. Over 90% hotels have seen benefit with OYO actually discounting between 30 to 70% fees for them by saying that please take the additional earning for you to sustain through this crisis. And beyond that, we are giving them more capital so that they can support, sustain and see through the crisis. Last, which is from our business perspective, there is unfortunately so many things that's moving that it's hard to predict the revenue. So I see most business leaders doing full-time job of scenario planning, including us. I and my CFO every day are spending most time doing scenario planning, but which is the revenue. So it's anybody's guess how much of that it will be. So the only thing you can control is cash and cost. So the only two things I'm focused on as a business operator beyond doing, it's important to focus on all the execution, but beyond that also a little bit on the underlying economics of cash and cost. And I think those are the two things that are in control of every business leader. So those are two learnings. Those are the few learnings that I have in the crisis summit. Thank you. Thank you for the wishes.
But if people are okay, then maybe we could take just the one more. Maybe actually run over by a minute already.
Yes. The next question from the audience comes from Mr. Rajat Wahi, who is a partner at Deloitte. Rajat, over to you. Please ask your question to the panel.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Rajat, please go ahead.
Hi, Ritesh, Mr. Munjal. Outstanding conversation today. Thank you for that. Lots of learnings from simplicity and taking care of employees, the ecosystem. Ritesh, just we're hearing a lot about whether this is going to be a V-shaped recovery, U-shaped recovery, W, L. I mean, obviously, especially your sector. I look after consumer and retail here as well. So we are more optimistic about consumer, especially the consumer goods coming back on a more of a V or a slightly longer U shape. But what is your sense? And what are the 2-3 things that need to be done from a government and ecosystem point of view to reinforce people to start traveling and staying in hotels, etc.?
Sure. Again, I think whether it is a V-shaped recovery, W, L, I think that's exactly what we are also getting various thoughts of. And I think that's something that, like you said, is anybody's guess. So we are all going to see where it comes from. I think travel segment, even though in the last SARS crisis, and this thing is many orders of magnitude bigger than SARS, last time it was a V-shaped recovery, but in our segment, while as optimistic as I may be, I don't think it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, especially with what we are seeing in China. I think we're seeing that it is a painful, at best, U-shaped and at worst an L-shaped recovery at this point of time. I think what we're seeing is the local drive, self-drive or people's ability to drive and holiday is the one that comes first, because people are able to make sure that they can take a 3-hour or a 4-hour drive and stay, and they don't need to take an airline or one of that segments. People prefer vacation homes or homestays more than hotels because they feel that they are particularly in isolation and not under a risk of various other people. They don't have a high touch check-in, check-out of experience. They expect sanitization standards and visibility in advance so that they understand what we are doing to ensure that who stayed earlier or who stayed later is not something that should impact them in any way. So fundamentally, for every business, there is going to be an after COVID scenario, and they have to redesign their business by using technology, at least as we are seeing in our travel and hospitality segment. That is, the touchless experience will become a very critical part of the entire travel and hospitality experience going forward. In my view, the recovery will be late, and hence the ability for businesses to see through this crisis is very critical. But the companies who make themselves known in consumers' minds as a trusted brand, as a brand which is not just economically sound, because if you're not economically sound, you can't see through this crisis. But even if you're economically sound, the big question that customers will ask, at least what we are seeing from various surveys of ours, is customers are also asking or caring about whether the values of your brand are very are core to you or not. So companies which are able to build a good balance of economics and core values, I think stand a chance to gain a lot over a longer period of time. But in the short term, I believe that every form of business and every form of touch point of experience will need to be altered with the new world of after COVID.
Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Rajat.
We have many more questions, but because we've run out of time, I'm going to recommend for future sessions, we keep this a little bit longer. That 45 minutes is clearly not enough. I think this needs to be either a 50-minute or a 1-hour conversation in the future. So we will stop the questions because there is also a poll which has to come in now. So we will just do that. It's 1-minute poll, then I will wind up after that literally in half a minute.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a very interesting session. Before we wind up, there's a poll which comes here, which comes on all your screens. So the question for the poll is: startups will get a fresh lease of life in the new world that is emerging around us. And there are 3 choices. Ritesh, you can also participate in this poll. First choice is agree, disagree, or maybe. Just so we have about a few seconds to do that. And we'll just have results in next few seconds. Oh, so the optimism is in the air. Majority, rather, it's a 2/3 majority, sir. If you can see, more than 2/3 of the people who are attending, they agree that the startups will get a fresh lease of life in this new world. Thank you very much, sir. I hand it over back to you, sir, for closing the proceeding.
Thank you. So, Ritesh, just to thank you very much and to thank the hundreds of people who have logged in to listen to this session. We appreciate your time and we hope you find these conversations valuable. Ritesh has certainly thrown a new light onto the issues challenging facing how do you manage people? How do you manage a crisis? How do you ensure you have cash lying around in a situation like the crisis that we're in right now? So thank you very much, Ritesh. Just I'll leave the last word to you. Any last word in passing that you would like to leave as advice for the many young entrepreneurs or many young wannabe entrepreneurs and the many existing entrepreneurs who find themselves in a fix right now? Just a half a minute from you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Munjal, for being a great advisor, a partner, and now also enabler to share our word with a broad audience. Thank you, the over 600 people strong group who made time to hear from us. I think the only learning that I have had over the last many years of my ability to operate has been, which has been less, but you know, I always say that I have had a 13-year-old operating experience in a short lifetime. But the only big learning I've had is every overnight success is at least a 5-year-old story. So I believe that you know, this is a long haul of a game. I'm beginning my professional journey. Our company is very early in its time, and OYOpreneurs are of course you know, anxious about the future, but at the same time very confident about their abilities in the future as well. And we are confident to see through this crisis and come out stronger. It's not going to happen in a jiffy. It's going to happen over a period of time, but we're going to keep our spirits up in these tough times and see through the crisis.
Thank you. More power to you and to your entire team. Good wishes. And I hope you get through this crisis, as I hope all of us do. And you continue to build this entity out into the giant that it looks like it is got to already. Thank you and all the very best. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Please do connect with us on the social media handles which are on your screen, and please give your inputs and feedback. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ritesh.
Thank you, Ajay ji.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
I'm sure